Greetings, travelers, and welcome back to the Tales from the Enchanted Forest podcast with your hosts, Fox and Sparrow. Or in this case, just Fox. So it's a bit of a hectic time here in the Enchanted Forest, but with all the buzz around NASA's Artemis II program and the Orion spacecraft, I thought the story of Artemis would make for a great short to cover. We'll talk about her birth, some of her wrath myths, her brother, and her relationship with Orion. And honestly, on a personal note, the Artemis II space mission and the whole journey has been the first time in a long time that the Enchanted Forest has felt okay for a lot of us and reminded us that we are simultaneously just a hunk of rock in space and yet also so much more than that. We have stories and memories and experiences that we want to immortalize and share, and that's how a goddess from ancient Greece and her brother Apollo get to be part of our stories for centuries. So we hope to share a little insight into her myth and be a bright spot in your day today. Also, be sure to stick around to the end because we have received some advanced reader copies of books that have just come out that we would love to share with you guys. All right, travelers, buckle in because we're ready for takeoff. As with all things Greek mythology, our story starts with Zeus and his many, many dalliances. In this case, however, his affair with the goddess Leto may not have been an affair, but an actual marriage. From Hesiod's accounts, Zeus had several wives before taking his sister Hera on as his last. His first wife was Metis, an Oceanid, and some of the myths she actually helped Zeus in his plans to kill his father Kronos and free his siblings from the Titan's stomach. However, while she was pregnant, he received a prophecy that she would birth a son later that would be greater than Zeus. So what did he do? Well, he swallowed her whole, and then Athena was born from Zeus's head. His second wife was Themis, and they had the Horae, the goddesses of the seasons, and the Morai, the fates together. Then he had the Charities, Persephone with his sister Demeter, the 9 muses, with another wife, before finally having Apollo and Artemis with the Titan Leto. Afterwards, according to Hesiod, he marries Hera, and they have Ares, Hephaestus, Eileithyia, and Hebe together. Now, this is just one or very few accounts. In the more popular versions of the stories and in many myths, Zeus's first and only wife is Hera, who becomes the queen of heaven, and all the other affairs are just that, affairs. None of which Hera looked too kindly upon, especially since she was the queen of heaven, the goddess of marriage, and the goddess of women. So back to Leto. Leto was a Titan and had the unfortunate luck of being one of the only goddesses to be tormented by Hera. Usually, Hera went after mortals and lesser immortal beings, and so the fact that she went after Leto was quite different. For example, the people that she did go after would be Selene, for example, Dionysus' mother, whom Hera befriended as an old lady and tricked into basically getting herself killed at the hands of Zeus. Now, according to the Homeric Hymns to Apollo, when Leto fell pregnant by Zeus, Hera's jealousy was endless. She made it so no place would give refuge to a wandering Leto for fear of Hera's wrath or Ares' threats. So Leto had to travel all over with no break and no companionship, nothing. The only person that really spent any time speaking to her was the voice of Apollo from her womb, and he spoke gently to his mother, but he couldn't do much to bring her to safety. Especially since Python, a giant dragon, also began chasing her because he received a prophecy that his death would be caused by a son of Leto's. Either way, she traveled for a very long time and she could not find anywhere to give birth. And she realized that as she was coming close to term, she just couldn't give birth. You see, Hera's daughter, Eileithyia, was the goddess of childbirth, and without her present, the childbirth couldn't really happen. Hera kept her daughter distracted on Mount Olympus and kept a very close eye on her to make sure she did not hear Leto's prayers. Hera uses this childbirth trick again, namely in the birth of another of Zeus's bastards, Heracles. So, Leto wandered, and even when she turned to her friends for help, the fear of Ares and Hera kept them from offering more than just platitudes. As she cried on the shores, she heard a voice calling to her, and a misty island appeared from nowhere. It was the drifting island of Delos, which called to her by name and told her to come, because the island did not heed any threats made by anyone, whether they were a god or goddess. When Hera heard news of this, she grew even angrier, but she cried that she couldn't do anything against the island, because the island was really Asteria. Asteria, Leto's sister, had turned herself into a bird and then an island instead of sleeping with Zeus. And for the act of not desecrating her marriage bed, Hera couldn't really do anything against her. So yeah, just to wrap it up, Zeus got Leto pregnant, and then while she was wandering the earth, trying to find a place to give birth to his children because his wife was keeping her from doing that, he tried to sleep with her sister. On the island, Leto grabbed hold of the trees and labored for 9 days. According to the Homeric Hymns, after the 9th day, the other goddesses who had converged there sent Iris to bring Eileithyia to them. The goddess of childbirth came at once when she heard of the pain, and as soon as the goddess of childbearing stepped on the island, Leto laughed with joy. She quickly gave birth to golden-haired Apollo, and the entire island became laden with gold. That's really great for him, but you might be thinking, where is Artemis? So nowadays we tend to think of Apollo and Artemis as the twin gods, but a lot of tellings of their birth actually place them as having been born in different locations and at separate times. Even so, a popular retelling from the Bibliotheca is that Artemis was born first, and then she helped her mother with Apollo. And that is why, despite being a maiden goddess, we still consider Artemis a goddess that helps women during childbearing. So, either way, the two gods were born. Apollo joined the Olympians as the sun god, the god of the lyre, archery, healing, poison, and prophecy, to name a few, while Artemis was of the moon, the hunt, maidens, wildlife, and childbirth. When they were born, myths say the two siblings went to every place that refused their mother and brought down punishments upon them. Apollo specifically went after Python, thus completing Python's self-fulfilling prophecy. Basically, it was a lose-lose situation for everybody, including Hera, who now had 2 more gods join the overall pantheon as full-time Olympians. Not great. So when we speak of the gods, we often talk about their favor myths and their wrath myths. The gods can get angry, they can get petty, and they can get jealous, as we've just heard about Hera. And a really famous myth that involves the siblings and Leto is one of Niobe. So Niobe enraged Leto by boasting about her own children. She said she had 7 sons and 7 daughters, while Leto only had 2. What Niobe seemed to forget is that Leto's 2 children were gods, and they weren't about to take this slight against their mother sitting down. So what did they do? They killed all of Niobe's children. Now she had none. And I do want to make a pause here to say that the Uffizi Gallery in Florence had a remarkable room called the Niobe Room. And I will upload some photos into the show notes because I took so many photos of these sculptures. They were really difficult to look at because obviously they were carved to be the moment that these children died. And in the center, you also have Niobe, and she apparently in the myth, a lot of the versions, when her children died, she cried so much and she was turned either to stone or she was also killed, but her body kept crying. So she had endless tears for her children that she lost due to her own hubris. And before I move on, just remember that we did an episode ages ago on Atalanta and the Caledonian Boar. And if you remember, that famous trial started because the king forgot to honor Artemis properly. So she sent the boar to ravage his entire kingdom. Artemis is a wrathful goddess, and nothing speaks more of her wrath than what we did the last 3 episodes, because the last 3 episodes we spent discussing the Trojan War. And one major story that we covered was the story of Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. Now, after Agamemnon accidentally killed one of Artemis's sacred animals, she had the wind stop blowing, which all but doomed the Grecian host. So without any wind, they could not set sail, and they could not set sail specifically to ravage Troy. A bummer. The only way to get the wings back was to appease the goddess and sacrifice Agamemnon and Clytemnestra's daughter, Iphigenia. I do recommend listening to that entire series. It was really fun to film and really fun to research. But long story short, Agamemnon did kill his daughter. Artemis may or may not have spirited her away instead and made her part of her hunt. And as punishment for, even trying to sacrifice their daughter, Clytemnestra later killed Agamemnon after the war for his actions. All of this to say that it should come to no surprise that during the Trojan War, Artemis, Leto, and Apollo all sided with the Trojans against the Greeks supporting Hera. I mean, the Greeks in general, but they might have had some personal grudges. There is one scene in the Iliad where Artemis and Hera come to fight, and Hera absolutely verbally destroys the younger goddess. She says, Better for you to hunt down the ravening beasts in the mountains and deers of the wild than try to fight in strength with your betters. But if you would learn what fighting is, come on, you will find out how much stronger I am when you try to match strength against me." And then she boxes Artemis's ears until Artemis goes home to her dad Zeus. And she leaves in such a hurry, in so much anger and sadness and shame, that she leaves her bow and arrow behind, and her mother carries them over to Olympus with her. And it is kind of a little bit of a sweet moment between Artemis and Zeus, but it does kind of highlight how Artemis and her brother are some of the younger gods. We did have the original Olympians, so the children of Kronos and Rhea, which were Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and then Zeus. And then obviously Zeus was the one that wasn't eaten because Rhea hid him, and so he was the one who rescued his siblings, and then went on to have lots of bastards, many of which became Olympians. And then you have some of his actual children with Hera who also became Olympians, like Hephaestus and Ares. Now, I could spend hours going through all of Artemis's myths and talking about her hunt, talking about her maidens, and maybe perhaps we'll do a part 2 on her. But for now, we're going to finish up this episode with the stories of Orion. I mean, because otherwise we'd be here for quite a while talking about her tendency to kill men, and with, good reason, because most of them have bad intentions. But sometimes she kills people for other things, like most gods do. So, with Orion, there are 3 established storytelling traditions when it comes to him. One tradition portrays him as a giant that challenged Artemis or tried to take advantage of her in some way. She ends up killing him and pinned him to the stars as punishment. This is a less popular version. In the second and third versions, we see him in a more favorable light. So, in tellings from Hesiod, Pseudo-Hyginus, and Ovid, Orion was the hunting companion of Artemis, and he once boasted that he could kill any animal on Earth. Well, the actual Earth, Gaia, was not happy to hear that, and so she sent a giant scorpion to kill him. After he did, Zeus put the scorpion in the sky as this constellation Scorpio to remind man not to go into hubris. And he also put Orion there after some beseeching from Artemis. Now, in another version from Pseudo-Hyginus, Artemis and Orion had grown close. Very, very close. And if you remember, Artemis is a maiden goddess. So her, Athena, and Hestia are the 3 maiden goddesses. They don't ever really marry. There are lots of stories about gods or men trying to take advantage of them, but usually they reject it. But in this case, she was getting kind of close to Orion. And this made Apollo very, very, very jealous. So one day, while Orion was swimming out in the sea, Apollo pointed to his dark head and challenged his sister. He wagered that she couldn't hit the random object from so far away. Taking the bait, Artemis shot her arrow and struck Orion clean through. Only when the waves brought his body to shore did she realize what she had done. Crying, she put her lover amongst the stars to be immortalized forever. She does later kill one of Apollo's lovers, but that was because he cheated on her brother and not so much as revenge for this tale. And so those are the stories regarding Artemis, Apollo, and Orion. I do want to finish off by reading a Homeric hymn to Artemis, which in my opinion encapsulates her as a goddess. I sing of Artemis, whose shafts are of gold, who cheers on the hounds, the pure maiden, shooter of stags, who delights in archery, own sister to Apollo with the golden sword. Over the shadowy hills and windy peaks she draws her golden bow, rejoicing in the chase, and sends out grievous shafts. The tops of the high mountains tremble, and the tangled wood echoes awesomely with the outcry of beasts. Earthquakes and the sea also where fish shoal. But the goddess with the bold heart turns every way, destroying the race of wild beasts. And when she is satisfied and has cheered her heart, this huntress who delights in arrows slackens her supple bow and goes to the great house of her dear brother Apollo, to the rich land of Delphi, there to order the lovely dance of the Muses and the Graces, and her arrows and heads, and leads the dances, gracefully arrayed, while all they utter their heavenly voice, singing how neat-ankled Leto bare children supreme among the immortals, both in thought and in deed. Hail to you, children of Zeus, and rich-haired Leto. And now I will remember you in another song also. So, that is the story of Artemis. There's so much more to her story, and I will have everything in the show notes, including some of our sources where you can also do some of your own research, and also 2 of the websites that I use that you can just use to do a lot of different Greek mythology research if you'd like. And from that, you can probably tell that I spend a lot of time reading and researching. And one thing I really like about reading is when I find books that have references to folklore, fairy tales, or just storytelling in general that really touch upon the kind of themes we cover in this podcast. And we have covered some folklore books before, but I'd like to just have a little segment on some copies of books that have recently come out or that are going to come out. All of these books were gifted to us by the publishers, however, all the opinions are our own. So first up, I just finished Denise Gallagher's collection of tales called How to Calm a Rainbow from Moon and Bird Publishing. The book is set to release in the fall of this year, which is perfect because it covers a wide range of seasonal myths from around the world. While I was reading it, I did notice that so many of our previous tales were covered in this book. So for example, The Girl, the Witch, and the Return of Spring is the Bulgarian whirlwind story that we covered. The Sky Bridge of Birds tells the Korean tale of lovers separated in the sky. And our all-time favorite, The Duel of the Oak King and the Holly King, which we've also covered and we also talk about so much because it is a fantastic story. Seeing as so many of these stories are in this book, I thought it was a perfect collection for us and also for you. So if you have any young ones in your life and you want to give them a kind of fairy tale collection that talks about why seasons change with lovely illustrations, I do recommend this book. Next, I also picked up a middle grade book called Nell O'Dell Hates Quests by Emily B. Martin. And I will say the first thing that drew me to this book was the cover, but after reading the first chapter, I was really hooked. I don't usually read middle grade books. The lowest I'll usually go is about YA, but I thought there was something really special about this, and the story follows a reluctant Nell who just wants to care for her chickens and garden at her family's Crossroad Inn. Unfortunately, the inn hosts travelers, adventurers, and chosen ones galore. However, the absolute last thing she wants is to be shoehorned into any quest of any kind. However, after a bureaucratic nightmare involving paperwork and taxes, she ends up accidentally on a journey of sorts, not a quest. I liked the character of Nell, but I really fell in love with her companion Midge. And there were so many different elements of this book that I really, really liked. There were some that I thought felt a little bit short, but in overall, I did think this book was fun to read. And it was also a quick read, so it was something that your kids could probably read, but also that you could read and enjoy. There will be a full write-up of this one on our website if you do want to see more, and also see some of the problems I had with it. Also, I am just finishing up the audiobook of Aicha by Soraya Bouazzaoui, as narrated by Sarah Slimani. We talked a bit about the folklore surrounding Aicha in one of our podcast episodes featuring a demon slayer of the same name, but this book actually covers the Moroccan warrior Aicha who fights alongside her father against the Portuguese takeover of the area. Now, I am really enjoying the narration style. It's a fun listen. There's so much world building and history, and I think there's a lot about grief, colonialism, unpacked trauma, a lot about father-daughter bonds, and also a lot about different cultural elements. However, I'm not really enjoying the pacing of it. I think it's a little bit slow for me personally. I will update on the website when I finish, let you guys know how it wraps up, but I'd also love to hear how you guys are enjoying the story if you've read it. But this one, I will say, is going to be on the maybe list. Finally, a little unexpected, but bear with me. We have The Infinite Sadness of Small Appliances by Glenn Dixon, published from Atria Books. This book is about a little Roomba named Scout, who is trying to understand humans and human emotions after the passing of one of her humans. I thought this book really encapsulates the theme of why we started this episode and how we started off talking about the Artemis 2 program and Orion, and how everything kind of felt insignificant but significant at the same time. And Dixon really pulls you into cheering for how stories can unfold in the most unexpected ways with the most unexpected heroes. After all, we tell stories to understand loneliness, sadness, happiness, and joy. And I have a quote from the book that I want to read that stayed with me till the end, because I think it touches upon all the things we've mentioned so far. So to give you some context, the appliances are talking about the music of Bach, so Johann Sebastian Bach. Scout says, It's that 300 years ago, she threw a glance at clock to make sure he wouldn't interrupt. He created a thing, a feeling in his music. And if it is well played, even centuries later, this thing comes into being again. Beauty, said Fridge. Yes, if we wish to call it that, but that's not the point either. It's that this thing still touches a human in the same way across all those years. It touches the soul. And I think that after all these years, these centuries, we are still touched by folklore, fairy tales, myths, and legends because they touch our soul. It's why we can send a spacecraft into space and call it Orion and name missions after Greek gods and hope they make it. In the same way that I hope that you made it to the end of the episode with me. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about Artemis. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing some of the books that we're reading and recommending. And I hope that you guys will also let us know if you've read any of these books and if you have anything you'd like to say about the Artemis spacecraft, about Orion, about any of the books, or just in general about what you want to see next from us. And with that, travelers, I hope you all have a great day, a great week. And remember, there's always a place for you in the Enchanted Forest.